My mother looked me dead in the eye over speakerphone and said, "Your kids are just too loud, Emma. Julian's new girlfriend is high class and your family's chaos will ruin her Christmas." My own parents uninvited us from the family holiday just to impress a woman they'd known for 3 weeks. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just said, "No problem, Mom," and hung up. Everyone thought I'd stay home crying into a cold cup of cocoa. But 24 hours later, when the entire family unexpectedly showed up at my doorstep expecting me to beg for forgiveness, Julian's too classy girlfriend took one look at me in my messy apron, went pale as a ghost, and gasped, "Wait, is she your sister?" What my parents didn't know was that Julian's pristine, high-society girlfriend had a massive secret, and I held every single piece of proof. My name is Emma. I'm 36 years old, a working mom of 2 incredible kids, and for as long as I can remember, I believed family was everything. But 2 weeks before Christmas, my mother shattered that belief with a single phone call. I was in the kitchen stirring hot chocolate when her name popped up on my phone. When I answered, there was no hello or how are the kids? Just a cold, rehearsed silence before she cleared her throat. "Emma," she said, putting me on speakerphone, "we need to talk about Christmas dinner. Your brother Julian is bringing his new girlfriend, Victoria. She comes from old money, very high society, and, well, she's just too classy for your chaos." I froze, the spoon dropping into the mug. My chaos. "Your kids are just too loud," my mother replied without a shred of hesitation. "They'll ruin the atmosphere. We want a refined, elegant evening to impress Victoria. So, it's best if you and your family just stay home this year." Julian was 30, the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. He'd been dating Victoria for barely 3 weeks, yet here were my own parents throwing away 2 decades of family traditions just to bend the knee to a stranger. I looked over at my 8-year-old son and 6-year-old daughter coloring peacefully at the table. A sharp, burning sting hit my chest, but I refused to give my mother the satisfaction of hearing me cry. My mother waited on the line, clearly expecting me to beg, scream, or burst into tears. That was always the routine. She would push, and I would bend backwards trying to fix things. But this time, something in me snapped. "No problem, Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Have a great Christmas." Before she could process what I'd said, I hung up. I took a deep breath and looked at my kitchen. For years, I had stressed myself out trying to host, bake, and cater to my family's endless demands, only to be made to feel second best next to Julian. If they didn't want us there, fine. We would build our own magic. My husband, David, was furious when I told him, but I smiled and kissed his cheek. We decided right then to plan the warmest, most joyful Christmas morning for our kids. No fake smiles, no eggshell walking, just pure family love. Then, 3 days before Christmas, fate stepped in. I was grabbing coffee with an old colleague when she mentioned seeing my brother's posts with his wealthy heiress girlfriend. She pulled up a photo of Victoria on her phone to show me. The moment I saw Victoria's face, my blood ran cold. The designer dress and posture were new, but I knew those eyes instantly. Victoria wasn't from old money. In fact, 4 years ago, we worked together, and her real name wasn't even Victoria. Her real name was Vanessa, and 4 years ago, we shared a cramped break room at a struggling marketing firm. Back then, she wasn't an heiress. She was a junior assistant who left the company under a cloud of missing funds and unpaid debts. I kept the revelation to myself, deciding it wasn't my fire to put out. But on Christmas Eve, the universe handed me the matches. At 6 in the evening, my doorbell rang. Opening it, I found my parents, Julian and Victoria, standing on my porch holding Tupperware containers. "We brought you some leftovers," my mother announced loudly, stepping right past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "We thought we'd do a good deed and drop off the food you missed out on." It was pure passive aggression wrapped in fake charity. My father followed, eyeing my modest living room with a sympathetic smirk, while Julian stood tall, holding Victoria's arm like she was a prize trophy. "Emma, this is Victoria," Julian said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Her family owns estates in Europe, so try not to touch her coat with dirty hands." Victoria smirked, adjusting her mink stole as she stepped into the light of my hallway. "It's so cute how the middle class lives," she cooed, her voice practically dripping with condescension. Then, she looked up and made direct eye contact with me. The color instantly drained from her face. Her smirk melted into pure horror. The handbag in her hands slipped an inch, her knuckles turning stark white as she gasped for air. "Wait," Victoria stammered, her voice shaking so hard it barely sounded human. Is she your sister?" The room went completely silent. My parents looked confused, but I just smiled, leaning against the doorframe. My mother frowned, looking between Victoria and me with a mix of impatience and confusion. "Yes, Victoria, this is Emma. I told you, she's Julian's older sister. Emma, take the food so we can leave. Victoria isn't used to being in spaces like this." Victoria didn't move. She stood frozen on my welcome mat, her eyes wide with total panic. She knew exactly who I was. 4 years ago, when she was still going by Vanessa, she didn't just leave that marketing firm. She left after trying to pin a $3,000 expense account discrepancy on me. I had saved every email, every paper trail, and every piece of evidence that cleared my name and forced her quiet resignation. I crossed my arms and offered her a sweet, razor-sharp smile. "It's so lovely to finally meet you, Victoria. Or should I call you Vanessa?" Victoria swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she tightened her grip on her designer purse. I don't know what you mean. My name is Victoria." "Oh, my mistake," I said innocently, stepping aside to let them further into the living room. "You just look remarkably like a woman I worked with back in 2022. She was a junior assistant named Vanessa Miller. Strangely enough, she also loved telling people her father owned vineyards in France, right up until her bank accounts were frozen for bounced rent checks." My father let out a sharp scoff. "Emma, stop being so bitter just because you weren't invited to dinner. Apologize to Victoria right now." "Yeah, Emma, what is wrong with you?" Julian snapped, putting a protective arm around Victoria, whose face had gone completely ghost white. "Victoria's family has generational wealth. She went to Oxford." "Oxford?" I chuckled softly, tilting my head. "That's funny, because the Vanessa I knew spent 2022 living in a studio apartment in South Philly, dodging calls from collection agencies." My mother glared at me, her cheeks flushing red with embarrassment. "She's obviously lying to ruin our night, Victoria. Don't listen to her middle-class jealousy." They were digging their own graves, entirely oblivious to the fact that Victoria was sweating through her expensive silk blouse. "Jealousy?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "Mom, I have nothing to be jealous of. But if you think I'm lying, let's clear the air right now." I walked over to my desk in the corner of the living room, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a black leather binder. It was the master file of my old work records, the exact folder I'd kept to defend myself when the firm audited our department 4 years ago. Julian stepped forward, his eyes flashing. "What is that supposed to be? Some fake proof you typed up?" "Why don't we ask Victoria?" I said, turning the binder around and opening it directly to a clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a printed company ID badge, a signed tax form, and a formal termination letter. "Here's the ID photo of Vanessa Miller, junior administrative assistant," I said, pointing to the crisp picture of the woman standing right in front of us. "And right below it is the legal notice regarding the $3,000 in unauthorized company card charges she tried to pin on me before she vanished." My father gasped, stepping closer to peer at the paper. The name Vanessa Miller was printed in bold black ink right next to her unmistakable face. My mother's jaw dropped open. She looked at the document, then at Victoria, whose hands were shaking so violently she dropped her designer handbag onto the rug. "Victoria?" Julian whispered.